Happy NFL Draft Day to all who celebrate. Has been a little bit lost in all the baseball, hockey, and basketball chaos as we are in prime sports season with MLB underway, NBA and NHL playoffs, but the king of sports, as many would like to say, the NFL Draft is tonight, and there's been no shortage of coverage, and especially now that we don't know what's going to happen for the most part. So thank you for listening to the third straight year of NFL Draft coverage on WVOF Sports, started by the great Colin O'Callahan. I'm Andrew Jameson, sports director here alongside WVOF sports broadcaster, one of the men who went to Atlantic City for the MAC 2025 basketball championships and for the Stags Women's Basketball Championship run, Mike Kelleher. Mike, how are we feeling about tonight?
Tonight is going to be one of the more interesting drafts that we've seen in the past couple of years. I feel like besides probably the number one overall pick, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of people that could be taken anywhere, really. From what I've seen, there's not really a consensus on after the number one overall pick. There's a lot of options at 2 and 3. There's a lot of questions about trades, which is I think a first in a while, or very difficult for me to remember when the last time we've gone into a draft with no team having traded their original pick. So it's going to be a lot of interesting questions to go through tonight.
Absolutely. There are a bunch of needs for a bunch of teams. You feel like quarterback with how the franchise-altering player, we've seen that in the past. Jane Daniels picked number 2 last year. C.J. Stroud picked number 2 the year before. Both have had great starts to their careers. However, the first quarterback taken in most drafts, I saw this on an ESPN talk show the other day, the first quarterback always taken does not always succeed right away. It's usually one of those like diamonds in the rough. So, like, look at Caleb Williams last year. I'm seeing on the big TV here. He had I'll be a little bit of an extremist here, like a nightmare scenario. Like, they did build around him. There are signs of optimism. Ben Johnson, obviously, new head coach. From a football perspective, I think that's a great hire, but only time will tell on that incredibly tough NFC North division. But second quarterback, are we thinking Shadur Sanders is in the top 5? I know that's been the main topic this past week or so.
I mean, I would probably say if he is going in the top 5, he's going number 3. I don't think the Browns are going to take him with the number 2 overall pick. I think they would rather go with the talent that's there or potentially fill a need at cornerback or at receiver with Travis Hunter, depending on how they want to play him. New England, again, I mean, they got their quarterback. Jacksonville, at least for this year, has their quarterback for the future in Trevor Lawrence.
He is still coming off of that scary injury, though. I remember that. He should be good to go, though. But, there is a patience meter. Like, definitely, there is a sense of urgency to win now.
Yeah, I would say with Jacksonville, like, I think, honestly, there's probably one, at best, 2 years left for him before they have to start pressing the potentially we need to take a quarterback button in the next couple of drafts. Outside of that, I don't really, I mean, if you look at this draft, you say in terms of the top 15 picks, besides 1, 2, 3, maybe 7 with the Giants, but I mean, they just got Justin Fields, so I don't think they're going to prioritize quarterback there. I don't see New Orleans. I don't see Chicago. Obviously, they have their quarterback in Caleb Williams. They've done their work to improve that offense, and I think it's going to be interesting to see, do they go talent or do they go potentially fill some other positional needs they may need? The Niners, I don't think they'll do anything. Dallas, nothing. Miami, I think maybe one more year of Tua before you even think about a quarterback. Indianapolis, I mean, that's its own little story of do the Colts like Anthony Richardson or trust Anthony Richardson
or Daniel Jones?
I mean, who knows? Maybe he'll start it. He'll at some point potentially start.
They are competing for the starting job at the moment.
I would not be surprised if Daniel Jones has a 2-week spread during like the 4th and 5th week of the season if Anthony Richardson gets to start and just absolutely has a terrible start to the season.
I mean, we do say in the NBA a lot, the best ability is availability. And, he hasn't been available throughout his career. Just 15 games played in his career thus far. I believe he's 8-7 in those games, but obviously he's had some controversial moments, particularly the one that stands out in my mind was kind of when he seemingly tapped out in that game. And then they had a good run under Joe Flacco. But, the Colts, I feel like, are also in that boat where they're always hovering around 500, but they can never get out of that 500 thing. And, the quarterback question, yeah, the quarterback dominates the conversation because, your team largely lives and dies by the quarterback. But we have a consensus that Cam Ward is going to go first overall. But then there are two, what I would consider generational talents in Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. I think go 2 and 3 overall. I don't know what order, respectively. I think either one is a win-win for both the Browns or Giants if they both take them. But what do you think is the most ideal fit for the Browns?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have them going Travis Hunter. I mean, I think in terms of what they've done this offseason, maybe not the most amount of stuff they've done this offseason in terms of adding players. They've added some, I mean, they filled some spots in terms of obviously the big one, retaining Myles Garrett. That's the big thing you need
I
to
was
keep.
surprised with that one
I
too.
mean, that was also
That's kind of a message. Sorry, go.
that was also that yeah, that's a big message thing of like they want to keep them, they want to compete, which makes me think this draft they're really going to try to bring together the best talent they can to put together the best team they can, whether or not that's they decide to take a quarterback at number 2, which I don't think they'll do, or if they decide maybe second round, third round, if one of those those potential like project quarterbacks, maybe a Jackson Dart, maybe a Jalen Milroe, if it's somewhere in that second round or potentially even early third, I think they could take a quarterback there. But I mean, two of their positions that I've seen they need are wide receiver and cornerback. And I mean, you have Travis Hunter, who is both a wide receiver and a cornerback. So I think because of that and because of the fact that we've not really seen a lot, or if any, in a long time, any dual position players, I think it's going to be Travis Hunter at 2. It just fills the needs you need. And then you can decide from there how much you want to play him at corner, at wide receiver, things like that.
And I got breaking news coming in. The new associate head coach of Fairfield women's basketball, recently named Coach Erica Brown, is that dog mentality, as they say on the Instagram. Well deserved there, but we'll get back to our NFL coverage. Just want to give a great shout out to one of the premier assistant coaches, not just the MAC, but in college, all across college basketball in the country. That 30 for 30 list is nothing to take for granted, so have to give flowers where deserved there. But going back to the NFL conversation here, does Hunter play both sides of the ball? Because he has been adamant about if he does not get to play both sides of the ball, he's not going to play. Now, I don't know to what extent that is true, but he seems like he fully wants to give it a shot. But the question is, will an NFL team give him that? Because, college to the NFL is a significant jump.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll probably, wherever he goes, which I think could be, at worst, he drops to 5. I think he will play both positions. I don't think he'll play both positions the way he thinks he wants to, which is I think he wants to play as many snaps as possible on both sides of the ball, and I think that's nearly impossible to do. The NFL, as you've said, it's a different ballpark a different ball game when it comes to going from college to the NFL. So I think dependent on where he goes and what a team's need is. So if he goes to the Browns, I would not be surprised if he plays like maybe a bunch more snaps at the receiver position, and then he plays situational cornerback positions. Maybe if he goes to the Giants, it maybe flips a little bit. Maybe he plays more corner at there and then plays situational receiver, like 2-minute drills, fourth quarter, last couple minutes of a stretch, or like what they think is maybe last drive of the game or something like that. I think if I'm a team, I'm not putting that much strain on him to do like 50% of like the snaps on offense that the offense have him play there. 50% of the defensive snaps that are played have him play there. That's you're gonna tear him down before he's even done with his rookie season if you do that.
Yeah, I think he needs to commit to one or the other. Like, injuries are commonplace in the NFL, and the body can only take so much. We talk about workhorses and all of college sports playing 17 games, 82 games, whatever the amount is, but there is a finite amount of ability that you can do, and it definitely feels like the Browns are, I think, willing to take that risk, as I think they've made it clear that the Deshaun Watson experiment might be, it needs to happen sooner rather than later now, because you don't spend that $230 million you do. You don't extend a Myles Garrett, like you pointed out, after he was very adamant in his trade request. But only time will tell. It could be a tipping point of the draft, as could the next pick with the Giants. And, I have a feeling whichever one between Carter and Hunter doesn't get taken will go to the Giants. But, there is that question mark of Shadur Sanders because, does Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, or Tommy DeVito give you enough of a edge, not to make the playoffs, but to compete? You're already in a loaded division with the reigning Super Bowl champs in Philly, Jane Daniels, who just took his team to the NFC Championship game in year one, and a Cowboys team who has a better roster than you, has had health issues, obviously, this past year, but it feels like you can never count them out. Do they take Shadur or do they go for the generational talent? I know this is a GM's nightmare situation where it feels like a no-win clause.
Yeah, for me, I think they take the quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if they take Abdul Carter at 3, or if Hunter's there at 3. I wouldn't be surprised if they take Hunter at 3. I just think right now you've got to say to yourself, are you willing to wait another year? Are you willing to then basically sign the paperwork to get potentially a Brian Daboll fired or anything like that? And maybe restructure your whole organization in terms of coaching and front office. That's what would happen, I think, if they don't take Shadur Sanders. I'm not saying Shadur Sanders is the best quarterback of the draft. I think he probably drops to me like the third or fourth best quarterback in this draft. But I think because of the fact that he's gotten so much attention in the media, I think that's what's really propelled him to be seen as potentially the second quote unquote best quarterback in this draft. So I say they take Sanders. I wouldn't be surprised if they take Sanders at 3. Again, I also wouldn't be surprised if Abdul Carter's there at 3. That's where I think it's either going to be. I think Hunter goes 2. I think it's going to be between Sanders and Abdul Carter.
I'm just at the mindset of you don't sign Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston to draft another quarterback. Like, one quarterback, fine. It's a great mentor opportunity. Like, you can learn a lot from Russell Wilson. Jameis Winston, he has the experience, although not the pedigree of Russell Wilson, obviously former Super Bowl champion. So I think Abdul Carter would be a better fit here. I think you do need that generational talent. Obviously, we don't expect the Giants to compete. I don't expect them to make the playoffs. However, you need to think long-term here. Your roster has enough holes already. You need to keep digging your way out of that hole as opposed to putting yourself in QB purgatory, if that makes sense. But then we're going to the number 4 pick here, New England Patriots. A little bit more of a solidified roster. Drake May, obviously quarterback, had some good flashes. New head coach in Mike Vrabel, which I really like. I know you're from the Pats fan perspective. You just brought in Stephon Diggs. Had a fairly active offseason. What's the move here? Is it the O-lineman Will Campbell, or is it something else?
For me, again, I've, at least from what I've heard from reports and things like that, all signs point to Will Campbell at that number 4 position. For me personally, I have Will Campbell going there. At the same time, I've heard some thoughts from people that I know that say, hey, don't be surprised if maybe New England trades back in the draft. Maybe they're the first team to trade back. Maybe they fall to a team like a New Orleans, or maybe somewhere maybe in that Raiders camp where they're in that 6th pick. So you fall back maybe a little bit, get a little bit more draft capital. And a name that I've heard going around a little bit potentially is the tight end out of Penn State, Tyler Warren.
He is, yeah.
For me personally, I get the idea of him being, again, potentially that next version of like a Rob Gronkowski. He's a very good receiving tight end, but he's also a really good blocking tight end. So in terms of how New England's won a lot of its championships, it was behind a solid running game and also a solid tight end group that could block. So I understand the point of view from that, but for me, I'm saying, like, you've got Will Campbell. Yeah, he's got not maybe the average size of an arms, or a little bit smaller in terms of a wingspan. But even if he's had that, he made it to the SEC. He's been a direct decorated offensive tackle. I've seen reports of Mike Vrabel loving this kid, and he seems like a really good from what I've heard in reports, good locker room presence, which is exactly what you need at this time. So I think all the signs and all the stars are pointing right to Will Campbell. And yes, it's a high pick for a tackle, but you know what? That tackle potentially is a generational tackle that we have maybe seen. Like, yes, obviously there's been Joe Alt last year. Maybe he's not to that caliber in his first year or something like that. But again, he has that potential to be a really good tackle, solidify at least potentially probably your left side. And if he's not a tackle, all of a sudden you have a really good guard right there.
Yeah, and I think there's duality to it. Evan Neal got picked. Obviously, he hasn't panned out, but Tristan Wirfs is a perennial All-Pro now for Tampa Bay Bucks. But this is a hypothetical. Let's say Shedeur gets taken at 3 or 2, maybe even. I don't. This is the most fascinating part. This is why we do talk about it as extensively as we do. But if Carter or Hunter is available in addition to Campbell, do you pivot toward Carter or Hunter, or do you address the most glaring need at offensive lineman?
Yeah, I would say it's dependent. I think if Hunter's there, as much as I think people have seen him as a potential generational talent, the biggest reason I would not take him at the 4 if I'm New England is just I really am questioning potentially a character concern there, and I just wonder again his presence on the social media and things like that. I'm not opposed to players being present on social media or things like that, but I just would rather have him. I would rather address something else. So if something like an Abdul Carter was there, yes, I would probably pivot towards Abdul Carter because it's like, I mean, you just got Milton Williams. Now you have someone like a Keon White that you can develop. And now you have a Harold Landry on one end side of the ball. Then you have Abdul Carter on the other side. I mean, that's a really good defensive line you have right
Yeah, no,
there.
absolutely. And you mentioned you have the active off season. Do you stack or do you fill the glaring needs? Because fit versus talent again. Christian Gonzalez is right there. He is prospering before we know it. Obviously hindered by injury with that shoulder. However, he is going to be back, and I expect him to have a great year, potentially Pro Bowl, maybe even All Pro. I wouldn't be surprised. Wide receiver, obviously you just brought in Stephon Diggs. However, I think you could use a solid wide receiver too. Some of those names outside of Stephon Diggs don't necessarily jump out at you or necessarily like a household name, but this team is still fairly young. This team is playing the long game, but definitely has upside to it, which was why this is one of the more intriguing things. But I go back to the game you won in week 18 when you lost the number 1 overall pick and then dropped all the way to 4. I mean, I guess I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you're focused to win. You don't play in the NFL to tank purposely. So I just don't get that message. Nonetheless, Patriots definitely have an intrigue of options and honestly could change by the pick. But number 5, Jacksonville Jaguars. I've seen a bunch of things with this one. Jacksonville obviously might have the most empty roster, I guess, in a sense. You have T-Law, but what else kind of do you have, I guess, is that other factor I'm looking at. Because, Christian Kirk is gone. He got traded to the Texans, I'm fairly certain. Defense still has many, many glaring holes. Your starting running back is ETN, but he's kind of had an up and down career. You can judge it on fantasy, but Brian Thomas Jr. had a great wide receiver rookie season. The defense has some names, but not any standout names in particular in that sense. I'm seeing anywhere from Ashton Genty to another offensive lineman in Armand Membo from Missouri to even tight end Tyler Warren and even Mason Graham, who was obviously a stud coming out of Michigan. So I don't know if you followed much about Jacksonville, but this is one that I would not be surprised if goes anyway.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, I mean, I've seen even reports as recent as last night or yesterday afternoon where Jaguars have interest in potentially trading up. They have interest in someone like a Travis Hunter. I mean, I think any team that has a glaring need at a receiver or a cornerback position are like foaming at the mouth with this kid. But I would say for me, I have at that number 5 pick, although there are some reports coming out of him saying that this player is falling potentially in the draft or in terms of how he's ranked as a prospect. Ted McMillan, I mean, for me, I've said for a while that if I was a New England fan and I was going to take a receiver, I would totally be fine with Ted McMillan.
Yeah, I think he's the best established wide receiver. I'd say obviously I think Travis Hunter is a better prospect. However, you need a proven and solidified pure wide receiver. That's McMillan.
Yeah, and I don't see a way that Ted McMillan falls. I mean, I've seen mock drafts where he's falling all the way to number 8. I just don't see a reason why he would fall past 5. I mean,
Yeah.
you have Liam Cohn as the head coach, offensive-minded head coach. Again, as I said, listening to the Adam Schefter podcast last night, just the most recent episode on that, just talking about what it's looking like, what the landscape of the league is looking like in terms of tonight's draft. It just seems like Liam Cohn's going to go an offensive player. Do I think he goes tackle? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes tackle or something on that offensive line. I mean, some of these prospects out there are potentially seen as 5-way players in terms of that offensive line. You can kind of slot them anywhere. Although like a bunch of them are tackles, you can see them slotting into that guard, potentially into that center position. But I think for me, I say what you've looked at, whatever else you've done in terms of your positions on that offense, you've at least tried to address some issues in terms of that interior line. But I just say you have to take a receiver here. I mean, on this depth chart, you have 4 or 5, like a couple receivers that are pretty good. Brian Thomas, really good rookie season. I mean, De'Ami Brown from Washington had a pretty good season as a number 3
but
receiver.
That's the thing though. Daniels made work with. He obviously had Terry McLaurin who had a great season, but also these other guys like Zacchaeus and Zach Ertz from time to time, even De'Ami Brown, who was great in that playoff run that Washington had. Liam Cohn, obviously the offensive-minded head coach there. I'm curious to see his transition into a coordinator to coaching role, as it has been marked by some question marks here. But I would agree with you. You'd have to think offensive here, and I think he wants a playmaker and a weapon. I think I said Ashton Genty just because he seems very like an impact player immediately. I think he went on the Players Tribune and wrote that letter. I'm gonna have like a Saquon Barkley type impact or something. Like, you draft me, it won't be a mistake, something like that. And the next team that picking number 6 at the moment, the Raiders, they have had a very busy offseason as well. New quarterback, new head coach. They are making moves. Tom Brady's in the front office. Looking here at the depth chart here, Raheem Mostert brought in, so that looks like your RB1 at the moment. However, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe an Ashton Genty gets picked here. I don't know. They love the big names. They love the big acquisitions. They just signed Max Crosby to that extension when everyone thought he was going to be traded at the deadline. The Raiders have had an active offseason, but I think there's an offensive lineman need here. If I'm looking at the names here, there's not a lot of solidified names here. I'm looking at that Missouri tackle, Armand Membo here. But I would not be surprised if Raiders try to go for the home run.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Ashton Genty is one of those interesting prospects because you would probably say there's maybe a lot of teams that would like to upgrade, have a pretty serviceable running back 1. But I think this is potentially a hot take here. I think Ashton Genty falls in this draft.
I don't disagree with you. I've seen him all the way down to the Cowboys, maybe even at 12. And I think Raheem Mostert, he obviously had that great. I'm not sure if it was 22 or 23 when he went on that like touchdown spree where I think he led the league in touchdowns at one point. I just think the Raiders love to stack, I guess, in a sense, and there are a lot of holes in this roster. Jacoby Myers, obviously wide receiver 1 at the moment for the Raiders. You have your best offensive playmaker by far is your tight end, who had an unbelievable rookie campaign. And I honestly feel like you have to build this offense around him. Geno Smith, obviously a little bit more solidified and proven than the likes of Aiden O'Connell. But I don't know here. It feels like another offensive pick here, though.
Yeah, it definitely does. And again, the way I had my mock draft, I have, again, this is like if I'm Vegas, this is maybe like if you're looking on the defensive side, this may be like dream scenario. I have in my mock draft with the Giants taking Sanders at 3. I don't see really any of those other teams flipping their picks. I think they go with their intended picks at the for New England with the tackle out of LSU, and with the Jags, Ted McMillan. I have the Vegas Raiders taking Abdul Carter falling all the way to 6.
That would be something.
I know that's going to be like a hot take, and anyone who listens to this is going to be like, that's a crazy move. But I mean, if you look at it, unless there's a trade that happens where someone goes up to 5 or something that really needs a defensive end or something like that, I don't see a reason why Abdul Carter could fall to 6 and be taken by the Vegas Raiders. And I think the Vegas Raiders would say, hey, you got a line that now includes Max Crosby at one end and Abdul Carter at the other end. Watch out, tackles. You're going to have to be on your
let's
best
not
game.
forget Christian Wilkins signed that massive deal heading into last year. They have been active in the offseason, acquiring Devin White, Landon Roberts, and even Jeremy Chin from Washington. But yeah, this one definitely feels like an offensive pick. Jets of the next pick, have a ideal pick, which if they did not pick, it would be very stupid. If he's there, Tyler Warren, you have to take him. Tight end is your most glaring hole on offense. Not only is he a great catcher and red zone threat, he's an elite blocker, has great upside. He is great in the yards after the catch. I think this has to be the guy you focus on here for the Jets. I'm not sure if you.
I didn't have in terms of my mock draft, I didn't have them taking a tight end. Again, hearing that, I wouldn't be surprised if they go offensive mind. I think if you look at just the structure of this team right now, I mean, with the whole Aaron Rodgers situation, now you have Justin Fields potentially as your QB1, or what's looking like as of right now your QB1 for this upcoming season. I wouldn't be surprised if they take a tight end.
I'm not content with those tight ends I'm looking at right there. They lost Conklin. Obviously you have Wilson and Lazard there. The defense is. We can talk about the defense, how much they cared all they want. They did not have a good year last year, but you have to hope. I do believe that with the head coaching change, Aaron Glenn, the defensive-based head coach there, he's going to emphasize both sides of the ball, and I think the defense will improve here. I just think the most glaring hole here is tight end without a doubt. I don't know as an urgency factor after the disappointing tenure of Aaron Rodgers, obviously. You need to make an offensive splash here, and I think Tyler Warren's your best bet for that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. For me personally, I have Mason Graham as the pick for the Jets.
That would be even more scary for that defense already with Quinn Williams, C.J. Mosley. Or is C.J. Mosley still there?
I think C.J. Mosley is still a free agent
He's
right
not
now.
on the depth chart. So
I believe he's still a free agent at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if they re-signed him, but I think right there, I mean, you put Quinn Williams and you put Mason Graham in your interior defensive line. That's going to really make a lot of pressure, and I think that could help their defense, which could help alleviate the defense, maybe put a little bit less pressure on the offense at times. Again, either way, maybe a Tyler Warren at 7. I have them going defense here.
I can see that. Jets obviously need to do something sooner rather than later with the longest playoff drought now in all 4 pro sports here. Next pick at number 8 is the Carolina Panthers, who had a great second half surgence from Bryce Young in the second half of the season. He looks like they're going to keep going with him as the guy. Chuba Hubbard, who is one of the more underrated running backs in the league by far here. Definitely still have some holes to fill. They have been somewhat active in the offseason. Seeing the acquisition of Rico Dowdle here, which only makes the Cowboys' urgency for a running back that much greater, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But I have linebacker Jalen Walker, potentially Mason Graham, falling here. I'm not sure about you.
I have in this pick, I have Jahdae Brown, the cornerback out of, I believe, Texas.
That would be a nice one with J.C. Horn already there.
Yeah, I think right there you would look to, again, I believe I heard something or I read something where, I mean, the Carolina Panthers had one of the worst passing defenses, especially when it came to the corner position. Like J.C. Horn, great corner, but I think you want to try to solidify that secondary a little bit before you potentially fill out some other needs. I mean, again, what I'm seeing is cornerback, really that kind of DB room is going to be a big need. Receivers, another one, and that's like it feels like a lot of teams are going to need receivers, and I think this is where maybe not as much in the first round you see receiver talent taken. I think you see them much more late first into the second round. I think you see a lot of receivers taken there.
It was a very heavy offensive draft here last year. Still is to some degree here, but more so with the quarterback. That's the more fascinating component here. But I think Panthers, they kind of just need to fill every position in the draft. And I think they're maybe at more of a matter of talent over fit now. And I think Mason Graham is the best overall player that will be remaining at that time. But I'm going to go to one of their rivals, the New Orleans Saints. And this is where I have Shadur Sanders ending up at number 9. So not number 3 all the way up. He's going to fall somewhat, but not too much. And, I just think this comes at the time where Derek Carr, there is greater question marks regarding that shoulder injury. I don't think he plays at all even. And, if I'm the new head coach for the Saints, Kellen Moore, the offensive-minded head coach that he is, I didn't particularly love what I saw from Spencer Rattler. He can keep you in games, but I'm not sure if he can win you games. And I think they are looking for a splash here with Shadur Sanders because the Saints, it feels like their roster's too good not to contend at least. This is a team that's always been consistent, hovering around 500. Last year I think they were 7-10. But this division for the most part is still very much up for grabs. I'm curious to see how the Bucs respond. As you know, Baker Mayfield can be inconsistent at times. Falcons, I don't know what to expect from Penix in his first full season at quarterback here. And to look at the playmakers here for the Saints, and we know what the defense brings to the table. I mean, you have Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, who hopefully will stay healthy, the great offensive line, and the defense. We know again what it brings to the table here, and I just think this is a much better scenario for Sanders here than the Giants or a Cleveland.
I don't have Sanders going here. Again, I understand the reasoning. Maybe like the Derek Carr experiment is not working out. I say they give it one more year with Derek Carr. And for me, I think what they do is they maybe not address an absolute need they have right now, but I think try to build some depth at one position. And I have Luther Burden III out of Mizzou, I believe, being taken as a receiver with the 9th pick. I think, if you look in this day and age, you look at how many teams win championships because of the depth they have at certain positions, like a tight end, like a running back, like a receiver. And I think a lot of teams are trying to kind of that need those receivers are going to try to formulate that. Yes, the Saints got Brandon Cooks, but Brandon Cooks is getting old. So I don't think I think he'll probably be your day one's number 2 receiver. I would not be surprised if Luther Burden gets in here and then tears it up in his first year and is able to just jump to that number 2 receiver behind Chris Olave.
My thing is, I don't think you can wait for a quarterback here, though, because the quarterback free agent class was not great. The Saints didn't get any of those guys. And the Saints, again, they're too good not to compete. They can't, I don't want to say can't tank, but with the likes of Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, and Tyrann Mathieu, they just can't be patient here. And I think you'll see that urgency factor kick in unless the Steelers trade up. That is a question mark because I think the Steelers are more of QB purgatory with Skylar Thompson and Mason Rudolph on the roster right now than the Saints are. And I think the Saints quarterback room is better at the moment. But, those are one of the two I think Shadur Sanders will end up on tonight at least. Number 10, Bears. I think this was a fairly easy one for me. Just you needed to take an O-lineman after the nightmarish rookie campaign Caleb Williams had in terms of just being constantly pressured. I have Kelvin Banks Jr. here, the offensive tackle out of Texas, to address that glaring need here.
Yeah, I see that. I think the interesting thing is what they've done at least in trying to improve those positions. The big addition was Joe Thuney in the trade from Kansas City. I don't disagree that I think they wouldn't take a tackle. I have a kind of a little bit of a hot one right here. I have them taking a safety. I have them taking Malachi Starks out of Georgia. I think if you're looking at in terms of what at least the Bears have at least done this year, they've at least tried to address some things. I mean, they've gotten a bunch of defensive players right here. I mean, Deo, I'm gonna butcher his last name, but Odebendio, I
Oda
believe it's
Benjo, yeah.
yes, him. Grady Jarrett, another good addition right there. They've
Yeah.
addressed some issues on that offensive line. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they try to just try to again fill out one of those back end needs. Again, I
That's
also
fair.
wouldn't be
That's fair.
surprised if they take someone like an Ashton Genty here as well, trying to just fill out those positions. I mean, Ben Johnson comes from the Detroit system where you had two really good running backs, and I
That's a
wouldn't be
great point.
surprised if Ben Johnson tries to kind of replace or try to reconstruct that with DeAndre Swift and potentially like a Ashton Genty at here.
Yeah, I would not be surprised with that one bit. So that's at 10. We're going into toward the halfway point here. Number 11, that's the 49ers, who you would not expect to be in this position in the preseason, at least. You feel like the roster is solid from top to bottom here, but they do have a lot of contract issues. We saw Deebo Samuel go to Washington this past offseason here. That Purdy extension is looming. You do have to pay him, and obviously Debo got traded for a fifth-round pick. I'm not going to say as a direct result of that, but somebody had to go. I have this one was one of my trickier ones. I just went with the best talent fit in terms of who was available, and I went with defensive end Mikael Williams out of Georgia.
Yeah, I here this is where I had Kelvin Banks going. I
That's
think
fair.
if you look at the roster and what's just that offensive line just really, really needs some help. And I think you have Trent Williams solidified as your left tackle, but I mean,
Is he
re-
healthy?
that's going to be a big question. And I think this is why you also take Kelvin Banks. If you slot him probably at right tackle to start, if he's good enough for left tackle after Trent Williams retires, however long that's going to take or however long that is, I just think you need to fill some glaring needs on that offensive line. It's I think the biggest emphasis for the Niners this season. And again, this is one of those positions where if they say, you know what, we're going to address those issues on day 2, this is another from really 10 to 13 or at least 10 to 13. This is where the Ashton Genty sweepstakes I think gets
I
really
think
high.
this is also a Tet McMillan potential landing spot. Brendan Ayuk is coming off of that ACL. ACLs you can never rush, and that Juwan Jennings, he had some stretches, but is it sustainable is the question. Same thing with Demarcus Robinson and Ricky Purcell. They're hoping he can develop and become more of a consistent wide receiver. Christian McCaffrey can only do so much in terms of the workload. Giving him 30 touches a game is not a healthy tactic. And if you do that, he's going to get injured maybe by week 7 or week 8. Brock Purdy, again, not the best running quarterback. Is he proven? Yes. Nobody's denying his talent, but he needs more playmakers around him to get over the hump. This is no longer a system QB that the Niners have the luxury with all the weapons that they have. And, I'm curious. They brought back Robert Saleh, defensive end, which I think they're going to go back to what they were, I think. I think that's the home run hire there for the Niners. Obviously Fred Warner, perennial All-Pro, but they got stripped of some defensive pieces too. Dre Greenlaw and Hufanga are in Denver now, and going back at it, this is where I kind of saw Williams here, but I also wouldn't be surprised if a Jalen Walker, the linebacker out of Georgia, gets picked here. The Georgia defense, it feels like they just come in waves. We talk about it with the Philly Eagles. Would not be surprised if the Niners go take a page out of the Eagles playbook here, seemingly also.
Yeah, I think again, this is one of those picks where they could go talent, they could go absolute need maybe on that offensive line, and again, they could do something on that defense. And yeah, just not losing some of those players is going to be a big loss. I think with Dre Greenlaw and with Ufanga.
That was like the heart and soul of that defense. As much as Fred Warner is, don't take anything away. You hear every player on that defense, kind of like that locker room, how he's that leader, and that injury when he was going on the field and then towards ACL, you could feel like the team energy just was sucked out of them. I feel like, and that's a loss that's maybe not evident in the stat sheet, but it's evident in the chemistry and the morale of the team here. But definitely unfamiliar territory here for the Niners in terms of picking at this spot, but another high market team and heavy coverage team, Dallas Cowboys. This is where I have Ashton Genty falling to your Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys have had a history of taking great players later than they've been projected. CeeDee Lamb is the first one that comes to mind. I think with the loss of Rico Dowdle to, I believe it was Carolina, excuse me. I think this is a prime opportunity for the Cowboys to pick Ashton Jennings, but at the same time, you have Jerry Jones as your manager, and you need to run everything by him. So who knows? And are the additions of Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders, are they content with that?
I This is one of those picks where I easily could see Ashton Genty going. I have him falling one pick later to Miami, but with that 12th pick, I just think they decide, you know what, we're going to go with talent, and we're going to say best receiver on the market, Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State.
Okay.
I think if you look at where this roster is kind of made right now, I mean, you have CeeDee Lamb, so there's your outside threat. I mean, I think what I've heard, the biggest concerns with Egbuka is he just going to be a slot guy? Or can he take it to the outside? I think you look at Egbuka, you could throw him right into Dallas, and you probably could just throw him that slot system. And you don't have to really worry until potentially if CeeDee Lamb leaves at some point or is traded at some point. Then you would have to question if he becomes your outside threat. But right now, you could say, hey, first year, throw him in at the slot receiver, and then try to develop him into an outside receiver.
Yeah, I definitely think you have to go offense here, but the defense does have holes. You're looking at Trayvon Diggs' injury, overshown injury, what a phenomenal rookie campaign. This definitely feels like an offensive pick. I would not be surprised if Ted McMillan is here. He goes here. With that being said, I think the Niners would also be interested in a wide receiver. Curious between the two, Emeka, or how do you pronounce his last name? Ohio State? Egbuka or McMillan? Which one do you see more upside on?
I would probably say Ted McMillan just because of that size threat that you have with him. I mean, he becomes a really good red zone threat. I mean, you already have Brian Thomas, who's a pretty tall receiver himself. So you have two really tall receivers if he goes somewhere like Jacksonville. But anywhere he goes, you can have a really good threat to get in that red zone and get those touchdowns that you desperately would need in the red zone if your teams that struggle in the red zone.
Yeah, and I think that one makes sense here. Definitely going to get a lot of coverage, though, nonetheless here. New head coach, which was the most fascinating part of this whole Brian Schottenheimer. McCarthy's out, but Schottenheimer is in. Went the way nobody thought they would go. We heard Dion, we heard everybody, but Matt Eberflus brought in as a defensive coordinator. He was kind of back in his element, definitely more of a defensive-minded coach. So it feels like we won't know until that pick, but that's the theme of this draft. But Dolphins, I think there's a glaring need here for cornerback, especially after Jalen Ramsey just exploring a trade now. This is where I have Jahad Barron falling, and they also lost Jordan Poyer, Javon Holland to the Giants. I think this is a secondary need that needs to be addressed now here.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they take a corner here. Again, I have Ashton Genty falling all the way down to here. I think if he fell down here, there's no way I don't see them. I mean, you're looking at that running back room right now. Devon Achane, really good young running back, but after that, I mean, it's a really steep drop off in your depth. I mean, Jalen Wright and Alexander Mattison are not the worst, but definitely not the best backups that you could have at that running back position.
Is struggling to stay healthy a little bit, I'd say, at the moment. Talent there. He is a very streaky running back. Don't get me wrong. It just feels like this defense is a little bit too many holes right here. This guy, Jalen Phillips, as much of a stud he is had season-ending injuries in back-to-back years. Jordan Brooks, one of the premier tacklers in the National Football League. Same thing with Bradley Chubb, struggles to stay healthy a little bit. I think this would not hurt to be a get for the Dolphins in terms of boosting that secondary here. But, Ashton Genty, there is great upside there. Everyone loves a playmaker on offense, and we are in an offensive-minded league. We can't deny that. So I would not be surprised whatsoever. Colts here. Haven't really thought about it this much. I feel like there's a lot of holes here that need to be filled. Obviously, the main question is the quarterback at the moment. You're not getting a quarterback, though. You can't take a quarterback here. You have to go with one of the two options you have, whether it's Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson, who are currently competing for the starting job here in Indianapolis. Jonathan Taylor is your solidified running back. I had Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. But that being said, this one could feel like you could just take somebody who you have no idea who they are. I like the secondary for the Colts, so I don't think that's a place you need to address. I think the defense for the most part is solid. I love the late Latu pick from last year. This definitely feels like an offensive minded pick. Looking at the depth chart, I don't know how if they're loving what Drew Ogletree is a starting tight end. Obviously, that is not evident of what actually plays out. But I think Colston Loveland would be a good pick here.
Yeah, this is where I have Tyler Warren going to. Again,
Really?
I completely agree that they should take a tight end here. I mean, those two tight ends in Loveland and Warren are the top two, and I think those will be, if there are, those will be probably the only two tight ends taken this first round. I don't see really anyone else taken in that first round from the tight end position. Again, I think if you really look at the way I look at this draft, is a lot of teams are not really thinking about the tight end position, or they already have pretty solidified tight end rooms in their organization. So, and Indianapolis is, I think, the first team I see where they really need a tight end.
Yeah.
And again, if Tyler Warren's taken it first, again, this is where I'd also see a Colton Loveland taken at this pick. So either way, one of those two tight ends is going to Indianapolis at that 14th pick.
Next up, Atlanta Falcons, who don't need a tight end in Kyle Pitts, although definitely need more volume out of him and expect more with a lot of playmakers on the Falcons offense. So Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, who's already one of the best running backs in the league. This feels like a defensive pick here. Falcons shocked us last year when they picked Michael Penix Jr., but hey, they need him now because Kirk Cousins wasn't what you panned him out to be. He did report to off-season workouts, although I do not expect him to get playing time whatsoever unless there is an injury. Cannot count out that possibility because their injuries are inevitable. They are a part of the game, and nor are they an excuse for team performance here. But I think defense is where you got to go here, particularly in that linebacker area here. So I have Mike Green, the linebacker out of Marshall. Obviously, mid-major school, not a lot of attention here, but he is a premier pass rusher here. Everyone's going to talk about Mason Graham, but I feel like Mike Green gets lost here. I think he was like fourth in all of college football last year with like 17 and a half sacks last season.
Yeah, I mean, he's a top sack. He was one of the top players in terms of volumes of sacks. I also have Mike Green going here as well. I think that's one of the glaring needs on this roster. I think your offense is set. It's really just the question of Michael Penix. How is he going to develop this year? I think you need to really go get a pass rusher. Maybe Mike Green isn't the best in terms of volume and in terms of questions of the talent he's probably played is the big question. But I just think right here, if you're telling me a guy who's gone from the previous 2 years ago getting 6 sacks to now this year doubling it, almost tripling it, you got to take a kid. You got to take the best available in terms of pass rushing, and I think Mike Green is the best one available here.
That's fair. Next up, Arizona Cardinals with tight end. They have one of the best ones in the league. Trey McBride just extended him to a large contract. I believe it was the largest in NFL history for a tight end at the time. Of course, there's a game of one-upping now in terms of contracts all over, but the offense, you got to just develop it. That's the next step here, I think. You have Kyler, you have James Conner, you got Marvin Harrison, Trey McBride. Obviously, this feels like a defensive pick here, especially in that secondary. You have Budda Baker, but who else do you have around him? Budda Baker only takes up one part of the field. There are 3 other fields which a lot of teams in the NFC West in particular can exploit. The Seahawks wide receiver room now have Cooper Kupp, Rams, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams. I have cornerback Will Johnson out of Michigan going here. I just think he's the best remaining cornerback at the time. I do see Barron being off the board at the time here, as well as forgetting the other one here, but I think he is your next best cornerback.
Yeah, I also have Will Johnson here. Again, same reasoning. Best cornerback available. While maybe there are some questions about his man coverage reliability in translating into the league, I just think, again, you really need a cornerback here. And the best cornerback available is Will Johnson here. So I also agree in Will Johnson being taken by Arizona.
Bengals, same thing. Need defense. The offense is one of the best in the league. Joe Burrow, if he was in the playoffs, probably would have been MVP. The offense is set. That is not the issue. But the running back, I don't know. Does Ashton Genty fall to this spot? Probably not.
No
I
way.
doubt it. If they do, you have to take them, though, honestly, at that point. That would just make this offense that much more scarier and lethal. So the offense is set. Defense, this is where the issue was. I have Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Oregon, going here. I know there's a lot of question marks surrounding Trey Hendrickson. Obviously, the contract extension not panning out the way both parties, or at least Hendrickson's party side has hoped. I have the best defensive player left, which is Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. Although I would not be surprised if they go with a linebacker here in Jihad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama.
Yeah, here I do have an interior defender. I have Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss being taken here. From what I've heard, and even I think it was last night, or if it was yesterday afternoon, I've seen reports that his stock is rising his draft stock is rising. So I originally had him going here. I wouldn't be surprised if he maybe, especially a team that maybe needs that defensive line, that maybe he jumps up a little bit. I don't think he's going to jump into the top 10 or something like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he jumps past the top 15 into the top 15. I mean, he's right now I have him at 17 to Cincinnati. A really good defender right there. And it fills, again, a need on that interior defense. Give someone else besides Trey Hendrickson take attention away from Trey Hendrickson in terms of pressure. I mean, he's a really physically gifted. He maybe needs to work on polishing his game, but if he can continue to do that and improve those little tendencies of his and become a big problem in that interior, I mean, that's really going to help propel this team back into a Super Bowl contention.
Seahawks, next one. I have Matt Golden, wide receiver out of Texas, going here. You obviously have Cooper Kupp and Smith and Jigba already. You lost DK Metcalf to Pittsburgh. Is MVS a valid wide receiver 3? I don't think I can see the possibility. I just think Matt Golden would take this offense to a new level. You don't need a running back. Walker and Charbonnet are a great duo. I'd say one of them, maybe a top 10 duo, running back duo in the National Football League. Charbonnet, when Walker was hurt, was a great fantasy value. I know we're not judging based off of fantasy value itself. However, Charbonnet did get the job done when Walker was down, and I think this defense has been a little bit. Obviously, you had great young secondary with the likes of Devin Witherspoon, who I thought should have been Defensive Rookie of the Year. That one year, Tariq Woolen, Kobe Bryant, Julian Love. Linebackers, you could make a case here for Jihad Campbell if you wanted to. I just think, knowing the head coach, that Mike McDonald, the offensive coordinator who came from Baltimore, I would not be surprised if he goes Golden here to take this, give Seahawks like a 3-headed monster they had with Lockett, Metcalf, and Smith and Jigba. Now that 2/3 of that duo are gone, as Lockett is now in Tennessee.
Yeah, I don't have them going offense here. I have them going Donovan Ezeriku. He's an edge rusher, I believe, out of Boston College, I believe. I think, yes, this is a team that maybe doesn't need a lot of issues, or it doesn't have a lot of issues on that offensive side need to address, but defensively, I mean, I don't think you could go wrong with getting another pass rusher right there. I mean, he is much more of a smaller guy, but he's very much and does have that high football IQ. I think that's one of those needs you have right now. I mean, you have some good defensive pass rushers, but if worse, you can plug him in as kind of like a backup right now, or throw him in that backup behind maybe a DeMarcus Lawrence or something like that. So again, I could also see them taking a receiver here just to bolster that receiver room with Sam Darnold and give him as much weapons as you can, like they did with him in Minnesota. So that's a pick where it's like probably they're just going to try to fill some need or build some depth at that pick.
Yeah, that definitely. I think Sam Darnold was last year a fluke is the question. You need to make sure it's not if you're the Seahawks and head coach Mike McDonald. to give him the best possible situation to compete in what I expect to be a competitive NFC West, although it was a lot weaker last year than it was. Obviously, the Rams won that division last year and did make some noise in the playoffs. Did compete with Philly to a great degree, and I would maybe upset Minnesota. Some people might call it. I picked the Rams in that game. Personally, there. But next one here, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 19. I think the offense is set here now. It's just a matter of play calling, and does it change? I think the roster in itself is set. Mike Evans, Mr. Reliable, consistent, 9 straight 1,000-yard seasons. Jalen McMillan, who really came on strong as of late last year. Chris Godwin, you know what you're going to get from the offense. Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving, who's going to shoot up fantasy boards this year greatly and maybe insert himself into a top 10 running back conversation here. I have them going defense here. More specifically, let me just pull up my mock draft board here. I have them going a secondary pick here because I really like Levante David. They kept him around. Obviously, Devin White's not there anymore. He's hopped around since he didn't make the initial roster. I have Kenneth Grant falling to this spot here. Defensive tackle out of Michigan. Obviously, Mason Graham gets all the attention here, but Kenneth Grant, he's no slouch either in his own right. Just an absolute wrecker of havoc on the defensive line here. Him with Vita Vea is a monster of a duo here. Again, I do like the pickup of Hassan Reddick. Now it's just a matter of if he plays. Tampa Bay secondary, I do expect to be back healthy, and obviously Antoine Winfield is going to be back. Would not be surprised here if they go a secondary pick here. Also, I'm looking at who's available. Nick Emenwari, the safety out of South Carolina, is someone I also have circled here, but I think you could go either way here, and it would still be a good pick.
Yeah, here I have Jahad Campbell going to Tampa Bay. I think realistically, you just maybe want to build a little bit more depth at that linebacker position and also maybe get a little bit younger. I mean, you have Hassan Reddick, great pass rusher, but starting to get older. Levante David, really still a solid linebacker, but also starting to get up in age. So I think right here, that's one of the big things. I could also agree. I think they potentially could take a defensive tackle here. Bolster that depth right there, and maybe don't put as much pressure on Vita Vea to play as many snaps as he maybe does. So it's either one of those linebacker or defensive tackle rooms that I think could just get bolstered and potentially just get a little bit younger just for the future.
Let's see. Next up, Denver Broncos, who had a great turnaround last season. Obviously lost that playoff game to Buffalo. Nonetheless, Sean Payton redeeming himself and the Broncos after that unfortunate tenure where they had Russell Wilson at the helm here. Have some good offseason acquisitions. Evan Ingram for the offense. You have Dre Greenlaw and Hufanga for the defense here. I have them taking a running back here, though. I have more specifically Amari and Hampton, running back out of North Carolina. You know, the loss of Javonte Williams hurts to Dallas. Right now, your number one running back is Jaleel McLaughlin. I just don't see them content with that. This offense is still very young, but I think the defense, you shouldn't touch that. That was one of the best in the league last year, as is, we didn't expect much from it. Pat Surtain, Defensive Player of the Year. Love what they've done with Nick Pitino, who should have been in more consideration for Defensive Player of the Year. Zach Allen is great. John Franklin Myers, a great veteran presence. Riley Moss has really had a good start to his career there. I think the defense is set here. I'm looking at offense and I'm looking at running back.
Yeah, I personally don't have, besides Genti, I don't have a second running back going in the first round. In this pick, I have Kenneth Grant. I think you build more depth at this point. I think yes, I think day 2 definitely Denver probably goes out and addresses that running back. I think right now you'd probably just say, hey, where's a hole that you may want to just plug in and just fill some depth that you need there. I think defensive tackle is one of those positions, and Kenneth Grant's one of the, I think, best viable options there at 20.
Now, day 1, you taking talent or fit?
I would say probably once we get to these later picks, most of these later picks, I have talent. Some of these picks are just like, you need this. It's like the best available for the need. But I think for the most part, especially in this back half of the draft, I have a lot of like talent being taken here.
Let's see. Number 21. This is the pick we're all talking about. The Pittsburgh Steelers. Will Shedeur fall? My prediction, no. Many other predictions, yes. This is the Steelers need a quarterback. You don't get DK Metcalf. You're not going to extend TJ Watt for the money you are going to start Skylar Thompson or Mason Rudolph at quarterback. But someone's going to be greedy and in need of a quarterback. So Shedeur Sanders, I believe, will be off of the board. Do they trade up? Well, we know they need a quarterback. They're going to take a quarterback. Do they trade up?
I don't have them trading up.
So they're probably
I have them staying potentially. From what I've heard, but also I wouldn't be surprised if they take a quarterback. I don't have them actually taking a quarterback at this pick. I have them filling out another big need, which is the tackle position. So I have Josh Simmons being taken there. I think, yes, it's a lot of stuff that you have to really consider in terms of you really need a quarterback. And from what I've heard in terms of the Steelers organization, they want to go into training camp with 4 quarterbacks. I just think you could potentially get someone of that same talent of Shedeur Sanders in the second round.
Yes, but who are you going to get in that free agent market?
I mean,
there's nobody in the free agent market. So my options here are you got a Jalen Milroe or a Jackson Dart. I think one of them slides up. And if I'm Steelers, I really like Jackson Dart here. I've seen a lot of mock drafts with the Giants taking Jackson Dart in the second round. But I think Jackson Dart, obviously the Kenny Pickett experiment did not work. I think he does have more upside. I think he's got a stronger arm than Milroe. I think there's more of an urgency for that, especially with bringing in Metcalf, and you already have Pickens. They need a true quarterback. They don't need a fringe running back. And no discredit to Jalen Milroe, but he was not what Alabama wanted him to be last year, given the expectations. But otherwise, I think Jackson Dart's a good pick here.
Yeah, I think they could all that could all get filled out here. They have a lot of glaring needs at that, especially at that quarterback position. I wouldn't be surprised if they trade down. They trade potentially either later in the first, or they maybe just try to trade out of the first round and just get as many second round picks as they can, or try to move up in the second round to go get that quarterback. I just think if they don't trade, they have to. As much as I would easily say yes, quarterback is the biggest need you have. They also really have a question at tackle, and I think someone like a Josh Simmons being there is a good option there. And what's also going to be very interesting in terms of that free agents market, yes, obviously the big name going out is Aaron Rodgers, but the guy's 40 plus.
I'm not taking a chance on someone who he's waiting for them to beg him to play for them. I'm not willing to take that. If I'm a GM, I'm not taking that. You need to pivot, and you need to pivot immediately. If he doesn't want to play for you, if he wants you to come to them, you got to go in another direction. Like Aaron Rodgers, if you also get Aaron Rodgers, it's only going to be for a year, and you're not getting Pro Bowl Aaron Rodgers. You're getting a worn down, maybe 60, maybe 55% completion percentage who doesn't run in the pocket at all. That weak offensive line, which you mentioned, that needs great improvement. This defense can't be on the field for 40 plus minutes a game and expect to win. We can praise Mike Tomlin all we want. That being said, though, you need a change. You need a change now, and you waited a little bit too long with Ben Roethlisberger. I think that one. I feel like obviously I can't speak for him, but I think he stretched the career out a little bit too long. They were hanging on to something that they didn't have. But this is their problem again. They're too good not to get an elite quarterback. They're too bad. They're not good enough to win because they don't have an elite quarterback. And I mean, I'm looking at week 1 in this division. You cannot start Mason Rudolph or Skylar Thompson. Injuries happen. We know. You have the likes of Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow maybe even a Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland. I don't know. Or Deshaun Watson, whoever that quarterback is, you cannot start one of those two you have in that locker room right now, especially going after DK Metcalf, giving up a second round pick for him, especially with the aging defense here that is, you know, I don't want to say hanging on by a thread, but, they haven't been as productive as they'd like to have been. But what is it in part to? The poor quarterback play.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the option they should take. Um, but in terms of like, if you don't want to give up draft capital, which is what I think a lot of these teams don't want to do this year, I mean, the only other option at the quarterback position that isn't take someone here at 21 would be go out and trade for Kirk Cousins. But even that in its own regard, you have a guy who's now 2 years off an ACL or Achilles injury, I believe, and he did not perform well. He performed for a good couple weeks in the last season, but then he just really fell off and then got replaced by Michael Penix. And I just don't. I get the whole quarterback, like the quarterback taking in the first round. You want to get young. I don't know right now where it's Pittsburgh again. Pittsburgh's like, in my opinion, this pick right here is probably the second most interesting pick outside of the New York Giants at 3, I think. It's where do they fill the biggest glaring hole that they need at quarterback, or do they fill maybe the second biggest hole they need at the tackle position? So I think that's where we're going to be very intrigued, and that's where it's going to really depend on, hey, how many quarterbacks get taken within the first maybe 10, 12 picks? Does more than 2 quarterbacks get taken? Is it just Cam Ward? Is it Cam and Shedeur? Is it Cam, Shedeur, and then maybe like a Jackson Dart all of a sudden gets thrown into the mix for some of these teams that may need a quarterback for the future? So it's really going to depend, and I think, again, it's really going to depend on that third pick. If that third pick goes Shedeur, then I would completely agree. I think the Steelers are a team that maybe tries to move up, or they're a team that really tries to emphasize getting a quarterback.
In my opinion, they should have kept Justin Fields because when they did, they have 4-1 with him. Then they went back to Russ, which I thought was an okay move at the time. But off season comes, I think you got to stay younger. You got to commit to a guy. They committed to neither of them. Both parted ways. Both went to New York, different New York teams. I think the Jets did make the right decision because, I saw the whole reports thing about how they flew out with Aaron Glenn, 20 seconds in, we're going a different direction. But, it's kind of what you have to do. It's the ugly part of the business, but it's business. Like, results matter. And if you're not winning, you're not going to stay, especially in as big of a market and as much noise as there is in New York. Not to mention they have the longest active playoff drought here. But the Steelers, they got to have a new quarterback by the end of the night.
Yeah,
I would not be surprised if it's Milroe or Jackson Dart. Could very well be Shedeur Sanders. It's that Saints pick is why it's most fascinating to me because I think the Saints are going to be urgent because nobody knows what's happening with Derek Carr really. If he plays, he might very well easily get injured again. And how much longer does Derek Carr have? You haven't loved what you've seen from him even outside. So I do agree with you. The Giants pick is the one that can set the tone. I think the Saints one also can change the trajectory of the draft potentially. Right now they have Mason Graham. I'm seeing a lot of sports mock drafts here. Defense, this is all over the place though. But that's my prediction. Shadeur's going to the New Orleans Saints, and I think that's a better scenario for him than the Giants by far.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the Saints are probably the best pick. The big thing I think with if Shedeur fell all the way to 21 with the Pittsburgh Steelers is if you haven't signed Aaron Rodgers and how much he's involved with the media now. I mean, Shedeur maybe not is the biggest media star in terms of like these young quarterbacks,
You
but
don't need a media star. You
yeah,
need a proven quarterback.
yeah, and that's where I'm very, very hesitant to take him because when you take Shedeur, you're gonna get Dion, and when you get Dion, you're gonna get all that media attention. So I think that's where I don't know if they would take Shedeur if he was at 21. I wouldn't be surprised if they do.
I think it's obviously Dion is an on you have to talk about. With Shedeur obviously comes Dion, and it's mainly a part where Shiloh's in this conversation here too, potentially getting drafted. Does he get drafted is another question. I'm not going to speculate on that. But Dion, yeah, he is an invaluable factor. However, he is committed to Colorado. He is. He did sign that 5-year extension, more than earned. He turned that program from a one-win team into a Big 12 contender who very easily could have made the college football playoff last year. Obviously, I still think they have ways to go, but that's another discussion for another day. I think he's committed to Colorado, and I don't think he's not going to have as grave a presence as people think he will.
Yeah, I don't know.
All the outlets are going to talk about his presence and how all this is going to go. Shadur's his own person. Shadur's his own player. He's a quarterback. Dion was a cornerback wide receiver. Dion, one of the greats of all time, not taking anything away from him. He wants nothing more than Shadur to succeed. He wants nothing more than the best environment for him. Remember all that talk with the Cowboys? Nothing entered into that. What did the Cowboys do? They hired a guy we've never heard of before in Brian Schottenheimer. I think this is all speculation, but it is a part of our job, as we say time and time again. Nonetheless, bottom line, Steelers are going to have a quarterback by the end of the day. Rest of the draft looks like all playoff contenders we expect to be in the hunt next year. Probably some Super Bowl favorites there as well. They're probably going to be going best fits here, I think, or even just best talent off the board. Chargers, I have defensive tackle here. I think the offense is proven. Obviously, Herbert maybe needs a little bit more weapons around him. That Keenan Allen loss still sting, but you need a little bit of a stronger defensive identity. You had to make some cuts with, believe Joey Bosa got cut.
Yeah, Joey Bosa's now. Joey Bosa, I don't know if he got released.
I think he's a free agent.
He's on Buffalo right now.
Oh, really?
He got signed towards the end of free agency.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard nothing in regards to that. You brought back Khalil Mack. Obviously it feels like, though, with these more established teams and contenders, it is a matter of fit and contention. I do like what the Chargers have done. They brought back Mike Williams, brought in Najee Harris. I'm interested to see how that plays out. That's a interesting acquisition there, but one I think could bode in his favor. Mekhi Becton is a great offensive lineman pickup for the Chargers. Great resurgence also after his less than ideal tenure in the Jets. I have defensive player here, though. Not going to make too much of it, though.
Yeah, here I have Matthew Golden out of Texas, the receiver out of Texas. I think, like you said, they need to bolster up some of that receiver room. And I think, again, bringing back Mike Williams is great. But Quentin Johnson, I mean, he had its moments last year, but I really think you need to bolster that receiving room.
One thing, though, Ladd McConkey, stud.
Yes.
He's going to be a star. He's going to be a Pro Bowler next year.
Yes, I think you need to get Young potentially on that outside deep threat or potentially just that outside receiver.
Let's go to the host now in the Green Bay Packers here. Jordan Love, a little bit one of the more riskier quarterbacks in the NFL. He has the arm talent, but that turnover ratio is very high and higher than most of his coaches and managerial people in the Green Bay locker room and facility would like. I have them going defense here just because they haven't really done much with it this offseason. I have them going more specifically Shamar Stewart, defensive end out of Texas A&M.
Yeah, I say, again, the streak continues of the Green Bay Packers not taking a receiver, and I also have a defensive player. I have James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee here.
Yeah, Packers have been dying for a receiver. They have not gotten one, although when they do take the receivers, they are injury prone. They do like to stay young, but it has worked for them. Remember when they shocked Dallas? But is youth going to translate into success? Because you can make the playoffs all you want. You can be in this playoff purgatory and like the Steelers are in, somewhat the Seahawks are in, and Green Bay. What good is making the playoffs every year and losing in the first round?
Yeah, I think you need to address some defensive positions. And as much as youth is great for this team, at some point they're going to have to go get some veterans out in free agency or in trade markets at some point.
They did that on the defensive end with Xavier McKinney, and we saw great that turned out. And the Packers, their defense played well in that game versus the Eagles in the wild card round. It was just a matter of the offense being unable to capitalize. I give credit to Philly's defense where it's due. They absolutely were wreaking havoc on the defensive line, just giving Jordan Love endless fits. But Packers maybe a veteran presence on the defensive end sooner rather than later here, maybe even offensive end. I think one of the winners of the all season here, next pick, Minnesota Vikings. I love what they've done on the defense, bringing in Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, Isaiah Rodgers, and, looking here, okay, we're in the J.J. McCarthy era. I love the pickup for Jordan Mason, although Aaron Jones is still your solidified RB1. I have an offensive line need here, more specifically Gray Zabel, guard center out of North Dakota State.
I have them here taking actually building up on that defensive side. I forget who it was they lost, but they lost one of their secondary players.
Cam Bynum.
Yeah, Cam Bynum. So I think they go corner here. I have them taking Trey Amos out of Ole Miss.
Texans, next one here as we are going in the latter portion here. Got to make sure we get to our 12:30. I have wide receiver Emeka Egbuka going here. Why? Diggs is gone. Christian Kirk you have in. He's not enough, though. And Nico Collins, by the way. Nico Collins was on a tear in that beginning of the season before he got injured. Tank Dell, as much as I love him as flashy as he is, he cannot stay healthy. And, it's unfortunate, though, but I think you need depth at that position here. I love Joe Mixon. I love the running back game. I think it's set. Looking at the defense here, I love what they've done here, bringing in Sheldon Rankins, obviously monsters in Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. Those are some of your leading sack getters in the National Football League here. Love the extensions, and the secondary has really been phenomenal. Jalen Petrie earning his extension. Lassiter, who's been incredibly underrated. Derek Stingley Jr. also recently earning a massive extension. I think Egbuka here, with that Ohio State connection to CJ Stroud, is something that the Texans front office is not going to ignore and capitalize on if they do have it.
Yeah, because of me having Dallas going with Emeka Egbuka there, I have them actually filling a position need where you've seen it done with the Laramie Tunsil, with him being traded. I see them actually taking a tackle here. I have them taking Josh Connolly Jr., I believe, out of Oregon, just to kind of fill out that right tackle need.
I had them next pick too, the Los Angeles Rams. I'm looking at that offensive line for the Rams. They're not 100% proven here. Yes, they did make the divisional round last year. I do like the offense as is. I love Kyron Williams. I love Puka. I love the addition of Devontae Adams. I think the defense is very good. Jared Verse is a stud. He showed up to play. He's a talker, but he backs up that talk. He can talk the talk and walk the walk. I do like the secondary. Darius Williams in particular. It could be a little bit more consistent, but Philly's going to get to you. It's going to get the better of most teams, I feel like. So definitely small sample size there. Also love Kobe Turner, Byron Young. I think offensive line here, Josh Connolly is the way to go here, but McVay, I think, is in a good position.
Yeah, here I have the other tight end, Colston Loveland, being taken out of Michigan. Yes, and I think it's because of the fact I think with Matthew Stafford, you don't know how much longer you have with him, and I think you just need to bring him as many weapons as you can, and I think bolstering that tight end room would be really good.
Baltimore, we got Lamar, we got Derrick Henry, we got DeAndre Hopkins. Well, he's not going to be wide receiver one. Zay Flowers is going to be, but that depth never hurts for the Baltimore Ravens. I was just thinking about this. I doubt Matthew Golden falls to here, but the Ravens have had gems fall into their hands from time to time, from Rashad Bateman to Zay Flowers at pick 23, or I don't think it was pick 23, but he was very late later than expected in that draft. And then on the secondary side, I remember when Kyle Hamilton went later than we thought, and I'm forgetting now who else, but it felt like they've just had a bunch of great players just fall into their lap. Would not be surprised if Matthew Golden falls here, although I doubt he does, just because of the need for wide receivers across the board amongst many teams who have higher draft picks. I have safety Nick Emenwari, safety out of South Carolina here.
Yeah, here I have them again. I think you can never really go wrong with taking another receiver here. I have them taking Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State.
Yeah.
I think they want to just bolster that receiving room even more, give Lamar more weapons to throw. I think that's the biggest thing that sometimes kills him, is that he has to just run, and he doesn't maybe have all the receivers he wants available to him. So I think getting another receiver is just a great addition to bolster that offense.
In the home stretch here, as the Lions, their biggest losses were on the coaching front. Looking at the offseason additions, not too much, although I do love the DJ Reed pickup here. That's a huge loss for the Jets and a huge get for the Lions here. I just have best available talent. I had Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama here. I think it's never hurts to bolster that offensive line, but I'm looking in particular at that right guard slot. Graham Glasgow had some health issues. Frank Ragnow's getting up there in age, although he is an all-pro. If you can get him on the right side of Penei Sewell, Jahmyr Gibbs would very well have a 1,700-plus yard rushing season.
Yeah, I have them, again, I think just best available, but I think they just try to bolster some of that defense. I have them taking Jalen Walker out of Georgia here. I think you just need to bolster your defense. I think that's the one thing sometimes that killed you last year was your over aggressiveness on defense, and your injuries on defense absolutely just killed you last year.
Yeah, and also they were running out guys I'd never heard of before. But there was a point where like 13 Detroit Lions on defensive players were on IR, but hopefully Ian Hutchinson comes back healthy. They definitely are going to be right in the mix once again for 2025 and hoping to win their first Super Bowl. Commanders, the shock of the season maybe last year. They've had an active offseason, mainly on the offensive end, bringing in Tunsil and Samuel on trades. Brought in Michael Gallup, which I'm not sure if that's well known, but that's a proven wide receiver to some degree. Not a wide receiver one, obviously, like CeeDee Lamb was in Dallas during his tenure, but they've got some nice pieces here. That McLaurin-Samuel duo, I don't know to what extent Samuel is going to be like a Terry McLaurin, but I think that's a great 1-2 duo nonetheless. I do like the offensive line. That addition with Tunsil is going to go a long way. What did I have here? I had a safety here. I had Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia. Here. Yes, you have Lattimore. Yes, you have Sainstro, who I love out of Michigan. You brought in Will Harris, but I think you need to bolster up that defensive depth, although I would not be surprised either if they go for a Walter Nolan, a defensive tackle at Mississippi after they lost Jonathan Allen, although they did get Kinlaw, which I do think is a great get for them. But, it just feels like they are going for the best available talent. With these final picks in the first round, instant see who trades back, if at all. Chiefs going just rounding out here really quickly. I got an offensive lineman, Josh Simmons, out of Ohio State. Obviously, the loss of Joe Thuney to Chicago hurts, and it was a big issue in the Super Bowl, obviously. But I do think this offensive line is fairly good. At times they had Joe Thuney playing both tackle and guard, and maybe even center at some points when Creed Humphrey was in and out a little bit with injury. But I think you got to bolster up the O-line here because the defense always performs. It's all about Mahomes and Kelsey, I know that, but this defense carried them to that Super Bowl in 2024. In particular, all those pieces are still there. Karlaftis is emerging quickly. Drew Tranquil has been underrated since he's gotten there from Chargers. Trent McDuffie's a perennial All-Pro now. Would also not be surprised if there's a secondary pick here, though. So I would not be surprised if the Commanders don't take Malachi Starks, that the Chiefs would.
Yeah, just kind of going through my picks. I had Washington going with a tackle, Gray Zabel. I think they want to bolster that tackle room there. I had Buffalo actually taking Michael Jackson, linebacker out of Georgia. I think to just continue to just build that defense as best you can. I could see them taking a receiver here late in the first round, but I feel like that's more of a second round potential issue for them. Kansas City, again, I don't have them taking offense because I think you look at like all the offensive tackles that have already, or offensive linemen that have really been taken. I think they probably try to fall. Either this is a pick where they try to fall into the second round and get some type of guard or tackle in the second round. I have them taking Nick Skirton and edge. I think you just want to bolster that defense even more. If he's maybe not the greatest sack threat during his college time, he was a great pressure threat, and I think that's the biggest thing you can do is create pressure that gets a quarterback off their pace. And I think you just need to really bolster that defense a little bit more. But also, again, I think maybe day 2 is where you see the Chiefs really kind of try to bolster that offense.
Yeah, would not be surprised. And round out the first round, Eagles, I had somebody from Georgia.
And yeah, for me,
Anyone on the Georgia Bulldogs?
anyone. Okay. I have them not taking the Georgia Bulldog here. I have them taking I gotta get where he's coming from, but I have Benjamin Morrison. He's, I believe, a cornerback out of Notre Dame. Yes, he is coming off of hip surgery, but I think you got a guy who's a smart guy who's really knows how to play the man-to-man coverage very well. I mean, with the losses of both Darius Slay and with, I believe, James Bradbury. I forget who the other corner was. Or no, it was CJ Gardner Johnson was another. But your
And he went
DB,
to Houston.
yeah, and your DB room really kind of took a hit there. I mean, you still have your two young bucks in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean.
Yeah, they're not worried about that.
They're
at
not
all.
worried about that. I think you just want to build depth at that position right now. I mean, you lost a bunch on that defensive side, so I think some type of defensive player here would be the best option.
I would not be surprised here if Donovan Jackson goes here, or I would not be surprised if Donovan Ezeraku, the edge out of Boston College, goes here. Obviously they're stacked with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith Jr., just straight up dogs. Zach Bond, great pickup. My God, they don't win the Super Bowl without him. Nakobe Dean, who had a great run before he got injured in that shoulder in the postseason. Eagles are primed to run it back, but obviously it's going to be best talent over here. But they've had an active offseason quietly looking out. I think it's more for depth purposes, but you've got Barkley and Dillon. That's not a duo I'd want to go against here. But yeah, there's a lot to discover. There's a lot that we don't know, and we won't know until we find out here. Thank you for listening to WVOF Sports coverage of the NFL Draft Preview 2025. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but it's why we love sports. From Andrew Jameson, he's Michael Kelleher. Have a great rest of your day. No Stags in the NFL Draft tonight, but hopefully the Stags are watching the NFL Draft here. Stay up to date with the latest Fairfield athletics content. Just subscribe to WVF Sports on Twitter. Follow us on WVF Radio on Instagram and WVF Sportscast on X. I got 12:30 class as well as Mike, so enjoy the rest of your day and go Stags.